universal declaration, a specific international instrument of the right to care be pertinent? That's probably one of the main questions that we will have also during today's session. Now, although the focus in this space is to politicize care as right, during the first session, we placed that conversation in relation to the framework of understanding care as work. During the first session, and I believe that this is a very important in terms of the political route. I'm listening other voices. Yeah, okay. So
no.
During the first session, and I believe that this is a very important key point in terms of the political route, we insisted on the need to think of both approaches as complementary. I mean, the right to care is not something that comes after the recognition of care as work, nor vice versa, of course. These are necessarily complementary political approaches. Next, Elisa. And no, you're right. Okay. That said, I'm going to recall some main points about what is specific about considering care as a right. First, that the exercise of the right to care is independent of the situation of vulnerability or dependency of the people. So, and because care is a right, the obligation to guarantee the right does not arise from the people's needs, but their condition as a person.
Aileen, permíteme un segundo, es que parece que se apagó el micrófono de la traducción. Entonces, solo si revisan, no puedo ver, pero en el chat lo indicaron.
Yeah, okay. Okay. The second key point that we can raise as a very important issue regarding the right to care is that, the right to care is comprehensive and universal. I mean, a right for all. All actors, including the state, should guarantee the right to care, and all people are beneficiaries of the right, basically because the right to life is universal and life without care is not possible. Third, the right to care includes several dimensions: the right to provide and receive care, to self-care, and to not care. Laura probably will talk about that later. Thus, the right holder is entitled to all the dimensions and not only one. And fourth, the recognition of the right to care implies its interrelation with other rights, since the rights are, of course, interdependent. Therefore, the right to care is interdependent to the right to food, the right to health, education, employment, and housing with dignity, etc. It's impossible to affect one without affecting the others. Next, Lisa, please. Having said this, and if we consider that the right to care has been increasingly politicized, an important question is how far this recognition has come. International organizations talk about the right to care. Do national standards recognize the right to care? And can we go one step further? Does the recognition of the right to care imply institutional changes or just the transform of the norms? During the first session, we took some first steps of what has happened with international regulations and the right to care. Several analyses of documents and international agreements reveal how care has become increasingly present in the agenda, and there is still significant conceptual dispersion and lack of clarity as to what care is. Some analyses also show that intersectional approaches to the right to care have not been systematized, nor is there a clear approach to interdependent rights at the same time. So it is important to continue to work on placing the right to care at the center of the politics. However, the recognition of content as a right has not always produced transformational outcomes, and we all know that. Occasionally, the formalization of a right leads to the sort of fossilization of the policy on that right. That is, in fact, a tension that is present in these debates that we are also producing. And finally, why is all this important? Are these only conceptual, academic, or theoretical debates? The reason why we brought those discussions to the first session, some of which we will return to today, is the need to build a common framework that allows us to politicize the issue of the right to care as a community. Much has been written about the right to care, and today this debate has much more presence. However, in many of the national regulations, the right to care is not yet recognized, or if it is recognized, there are not real guarantees for that right. At the same time, at least part of the struggles of caregivers are often not raised in terms of the right to care. And this implies, for example, a disconnection between the struggles of paid and unpaid workers. And so we could continue listing reasons why we are having this discussion and why in all possible entries, we have chosen the right to care for this community of analysis that hopefully could also become a community of practices on the right to care. I'm going to leave it at this point, and I'm going to give the floor to Laura Pautassi, who is going to accompany us today in the debate and will give us the first inputs for our discussion.
Muchas gracias, Aileen. Decirles que ahora la presentación que va a dar Laura Pautassi, también tenemos igual el PowerPoint en inglés y en español. El de Aileen solo lo tuvimos.
Thank you very much, Eileen. We're going to have a PowerPoint in English and Spanish, and we believe that unless you think differently, we can follow Laura or following her presentation in Spanish. Anyway, in the chat, you will have the two presentations in Spanish and English on PDF format if you want to download them, and you can follow Laura with using the presentation in Spanish. So we will go to the first block with Laura Pautassi. She's the principal investigator of the National Council of Scientific and Legal Research and a professor at the University of Buenos Aires. So Laura, you have the floor, and I will share your presentation. Hello, thank you very much. It's great to see you here and share, be part of this analytical community. I want to thank all the organizations that have made this possible, and to the Everett Foundation for making this possible as well. As Eileen was saying, the right to care has been a challenge, a challenge in terms of its conceptualization. Now let's start with the presentation and thinking of this first meeting and talk about the outlines of the framework that when we talk about care. And I think here I want to do a special recognition to all the production, theoretical and conceptual conceptions that have been generated in Latin America and the Caribbean. Can we go to the next slide? What do we mean when we talk about care? With the pandemic, there was this term that everyone talked about. So take care of yourself. I will take care of you. It's not that everything that happens in our lives is care, but care touches us all every day. So what does it mean, care? What does care mean? So all activities, and this is it's especially important because they constitute a society, our day-to-day life. They allow the sustaining and reproducing life and have an impact on everyone's life throughout our lives. So it is constituted by material and emotional elements. That's why the care work is so important. We talk about these activities that we conceptualize as work, but within these activities that make up work, there are elements that feed the people, the persons, and that has to do with the emotional elements of care work. It also includes a big set that's to take care of others, which is how we associate care usually. This is an important thing in this construction of emotional work, because the way we look at care, because care has been feminized, we all also think of care in terms of others, and how the construction of identities of women are built on others. But care is generally associated with the activity to give, to offer a care to others. But those activities that take care of others imply a wide set of healthcare, and in general, the care has been invisibilized. So the category of care has been even more. So it's important to shed light of what self-work means and how it's integrated into this big concept of care. And finally, within this addition of tasks, of activities that make up work, that imply care, it's work. And this is a great field of analysis, and that's why we started the association of work with the care of children, since work refers to the care for children. For example, the categories have been developed throughout the years, and care unpaid work in health gives us a new set of people that will demand or provide care. So there's a recognition of work because it implies effort, competences, in skills, but also that it generates economic value. And I was saying at the beginning, the contribution in terms of conceptual definition. And with this, I want Elisa to change the slide. It has been a conceptualization that has been very rich in terms of interdisciplinary contributions to the conceptualization of care in the production of economic value. But in all this development, what we see in the conceptualization of activities of care, they could be paid or unpaid. Generally, care is associated with unpaid work, but paid work is also has a place in economic sectors that have been made visible lately. The most frequent example in this is domestic work, paid domestic work. That is due to this type of work was not formalized, without protection, and without a hierarchy. But the care can also be carried out, and it's been carried out for free in households by women. It's also something that can be provided by the market and for organizations, community and social organizations. This contribution is the great contributes to the great diamond of care. When we talk about the contributions in 2007 and the interpretations related to this four sectors in Latin America, helps us to characterize that the provision of care paid or unpaid, is a consequence of political elections, cultural values, and of course structural gender structures. These gender structures that are linked to this patriarchal power are going to establish the social corresponsibility, economic responsibility of care that will be touched by these nuances of care. But there's always a construction that will a sexual construction of an economic of economic and sexual responsibility. That's why the responsibilities of care are transferred to women because of these linkages between, because it will have an impact on all the discussion. Why is it important to study care? There are multiple reasons, and multiple reasons, as Darlene said, that are taking us to this construction of the agenda, because of the reproduction and sustenance of societies. This is the feminist economy says about sustainability of life should be at the center of the agenda. It's also an important native theoretical and empirical production in America. And this is important because we have a critical note of inequality. We are used to hearing that this is the continent that has the more unequal continent in the world. And there's a gap between those who accumulate wealth and those who don't have anything. But very few times do we focus on the sexual division of work and care. And this is the critical note that touches the whole continent. So in this 21st century, there have been public policies to decrease on inequalities in markets and care responsibilities. However, it's still disconnected, more unequal continent in terms of the unequal distribution of these responsibilities, both for paid and unpaid work. And we go to the central point of autonomy. The economic autonomy is where law has played a great role to establish the role of women regarding men. We have had a relative autonomy throughout the years, and its linkage has been based on her being with a man. These are the first regulatory frameworks established, gave women autonomy to exercise their rights. So the rights to the permits to work, the lack of availability, it was depended to their links to the man or their husband. The law can be a factor in creating inequalities. So we need to analyze this and recognize care as a right, and consider to have these three fields of autonomy: economic autonomy, for physical autonomy, and autonomy in decision making. That the gender observatory in Latin America, the ICLAC that has talked about, with this critical nucleus is relative. We established this link between the formal equality, I mean the legal frameworks that establish equality for women, and with those to critical nuclei regarding the exercise of rights. And what does this mean? What does this center means? Well, it refers to this world of labor relations. is the world that have been regulated, that have been rationales that have been established as standards where labor law regulates an unequal relationship between work and capital, where workers are in unequal conditions regarding capital, but there's a framework that makes them equal, but this inequality that becomes a standard to establish a framework that is establish parity. But in the case of women, it didn't work that way. That's why the relationships between in the world of market and in the work market that is paid, because we have an unpaid work market, because this is the market of the non-monetized sector is plagued with adverse circumstances in terms of the exercise of rights to work. Would generate these situations that still persist in Latin America, a vertical segregation, a horizontal occupational segregation, what that women occupy posts that belong to lower hierarchies. Then we have different impact on of the number of children, and in the trajectories of women, there's the responsibilities of care, and there are multiple cross-cutting forms of gender discrimination. And what we see in the field of care, and here we're going to start with the difference between paid market and the market of care work that could be paid or unpaid. There's a first indicator of inequality that have trapped women in relations that are linked to distribution of time. And so that's we have had a service to measure the use of time that made the time use became more evident, because this care like this will promote a lack of time for women and create poverty. Poverty has been feminized in the region. In households, the care is not fairly distributed. Poverty and access to food is equal, is fair. So we started this 21st century with a structural inequality where there was there was change, and inequality has been created because, and that's what we think about. We talk about the crisis in care, because with the massive integration of women in the market was not correlated with the incorporation of men in care tasks and care work, or the social responsibility of care. So a right holder, to be a right holder, we need, what are the conditions that people have to have access to the required mechanisms for care and the infrastructure established for that end. I think the right, being a right holder and the ability for us to demand this right is very important, because we're going to take a look at the impact it would have on the problem of care, that will take us to a problem of the exercise of rights when these have been agreed upon. So that's important to take a look at work, when and how what circumstances are we rights holders, and how are we to exercise this right? Is the way we exercise the right has a correlation in the material world, and recognition of rights or the absence of recognition of this right will take us to a problem of this redistribution of inequalities, and that redistribution is the condition of the public policy. Public policy is created with the objective to distribute well-being, but before distributing well-being, they have to guarantee well-being. Therefore, these relationships are essential so that we can finish this first section. And we can take a look at the next slide, and when we can see, because the first the main definitions that have been agreed by specialists that are part of this regulatory framework and conceptual framework that's important in the region. We have work as the care is defined as care worked at the end of 20th century, where this recognition that where we started the reproductive care, it was mainly by being able that this in the private sphere, the relationships between production and reproduction that were produced were considered as activities that implied care, and that's the way it was differentiated, the direct care from indirect work. Direct care, that activities to attend to others directly, while indirect generates the preconditions to carry out this indirect care, implies housekeeping activities, but it's important because it contributes to environmental care. We can see the more current definitions. The economy of care, a process of distribute, exchange, and consumes care services. It's the economy of services, the rights, and mainly the contributions from the political sciences to this concept. And when we talk about this, thanks to feminist economists, we can take a look at this process where this distribution and exchange of consumption of services take place. Then we have the obligation that the state has to have in to decrease inequalities. We have the that will become public policies that will regulate supply and demand of care in society. And finally, and as Eileen was saying, in the last 15 years that we have this right to care is, and we're going to work on this, the right to care, to provide care, to receive care, and to self-care. And to finish this first part, when we analyze the frameworks, legal frameworks regarding care, before we got to this definition, when we analyze the regulatory frames, that all of the standards, care has been included, as was envisaged. It has not been defined as such. We have civil codes that have that they contemplated autonomy for women, but all the responsibilities of care were shouldered by women. However, the rights holder, had to do the last names of children were the men's. This figure of it was an attribute that were only for men. But in the standards of labor law, civil law, and thanks to feminist activism that helped transform this standard, the obligations in terms of care were to the obligation to the children, and the children to their ancestors, and they also have to take care of our ancestors. We all have obligations toward if they are vulnerable in terms of their autonomy. The responsibilities that are linked to care work are centrally lie in lie in the protection of motherhood, and that's why most of the labor laws protected women in their capacity to conceive. This and therefore the regulatory framework at first established beneficiaries that depended on time and care responsibilities, to leaves as well, work leaves, to guarantee this kind of benefits to formal wage workers, and excluded the rest of care work in the informal sector, and also with responsibilities that were absolutely marginal in regards to men. The great example is that the leave, maternity leave in this region is in average between 2 and 5 years, exception for a couple of countries that have advanced in this regard. In terms of labor law and tax law, and now in tax law, in this, what the next slide shows is that there's three central elements to guarantee care: time, duration, and there's just the leave centered on women. Because why? Because Social Security and the right to Social Security is selective. It's conditioned. It's dependent on being formally part of the formal sector of paid work. So the mechanism of this leaves happened at the moment when the women worker says that she's pregnant, and so all these mechanisms are triggered. But the systems of leaves are centered on women. But it's also, there's the obligation for the employers to give the infrastructure to care and systems and cash transfer systems for formal wage earners. And what we can see in it now is the social protection regulation. It made progress that incorporating care responsibilities using programs, conditional cash transfer programs, these programs that are massive in all region. The opportunity that is the program in Mexico, for example, Bolsa Familia in Brazil, and others in Argentina, they established the recognition of the need of a transfer of income to those women that work in the informal sector. So the rights holders can 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 be given to these women, and 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 in the 1990s they started to cut public policies by using these programs that were focalized in the region, that it's more massive, but now it's more focalized, where they give benefits, where they provide benefits in terms of well-being, together with health, education, social development. That is the fourth pillar recognized in Uruguay in terms of social being. And this would be the end of the first part, so I will continue with the second part.
Thank you very much, Laura. As you could see in this first part, we had a very brief historical summary to see how we reached the concept, we developed the concept of care as a right, which is, as you can see, brand relatively new. And I think in Latin America, it has been like a beacon to push the agenda for care, on care. We'd like to pause for a moment to see if there are comments or questions about this first part, and then we will deepen on the concept of the right to care. Lourdes Jimenez, please. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lourdes Jimenez. I'm a researcher with the Inter-American Conference on Social Security. I have a question for Dr. Pautassi. For us, these debates on the design of social security systems are very important because, as you've just said, we believe the problem is one of design because, uh, 80 years ago, things were planned for men without family responsibilities. Diversity was not considered, and the different family configurations were not considered, let alone inequalities. So the first question is, could we consider care as a social risk, understanding that social benefits are designed as a second step? First, taking into consideration there are some contingencies that affect or can affect the income, the life of the persons. And based on this, we design responses, which are the benefits. So could we consider care as a new social risk? Are we in a moment where we can offer new conceptualizations? And my second question is, I've read your work about to assess compensatory measures in terms of care and social protection. And for me, compensatory measures is a concept that makes noise because they compensate, but they do not make changes. So can we stop talking about compensatory measures? Can we stop requesting compensatory measures to really discuss design problems and design solutions that can lead to full and not relative autonomy? Thank you, Lourdes. If you agree, Lara, we can collect 3 questions and then you reply. Gabriela Nim, do you? Sorry, yes, I work with the Ministry of Women and Vulnerable Populations in Peru. I have a question because I don't know if this is related to what you said. So it's different to talk about care in countries that have a welfare state history and in countries where there is none. In my country, we have had some benefits, but in Peru, there has never been any such thing that looks like care. We have talked about sustainability of life, but our trajectories have been really different. So could you make a brief comparison? I thank you. Eileen, do you have a question? Yeah, I have a comment, perhaps a very brief question. My first, could you deepen more how to deal with this kind of attention, the tension created by the feminist discussions and the political discussions, and also the discussion of care in terms of interdependence? How can we link the issue of autonomy and interdependence to politicize in terms of justice and not feeding the atomization of an autonomous subject? The other thing I wanted to say was with regard to something we were saying about the interdependence of rights that has to do with placing care as as the fourth pillar of the social policy. I think this is key because we still need to address the fact that whether we need to guarantee the right to education, housing, why do we need to think of the right to care, or if we focus on the right to care, are we going to forget about things that are so important as education, health, and housing? I think we need to think in practical terms. How can we politicize care so that it can become public policy? And I was wondering if during the pandemic, although the discussion on care was very important and that the discussion on care was reactivated, other discussions in the global north and the global south. I was thinking of the discussions on the minimum life income and the basic income, and see how these debates, seem to be parallel debates. There's a discussion on the basic income as a pathway to leave the crisis, and what is the relationship all these debates to and the discussion on care. How can we link care to all these other debates on specific public policies that are emerging? And I think we can, I want to tell you that Veronica Montufa is sharing materials, and this manifest that wants to have that calls on a global movement on care. The materials are both in English and Spanish. Okay, another question. Good morning, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. I have a question, or rather an invitation to reflect on the following. Regarding care as a right from a human rights approach, where the central obligation is that of the state is obligated to protect it, disseminate it, socialize it. There is also an issue regarding co-responsibility and the participation of other actors in its guarantee, the guarantee of this right. We can talk about society, market, the private sector, as if all the actors had the same level of responsibility. And I believe there's a lot of literature and there has been much debate, but it is still not clear what level of participation and responsibility each actor has, especially when we regard care as a right and when we know the main responsibility lies with the state. So could we analyze the participation of the other actors and the level of responsibility the other actors have compared to that of the state? Could we do that, please? Thank you. Go ahead, Laura. Thank you very much. You know, I was going to cover much of this in the second part, but welcome. Your comments and questions are welcome. Lourdes, your question is extraordinary. Why? Because we have agreed that many of us for many years have requested a review of the doctrines. So at least as a feminist trained in the framework of law that is a reproductor of inequalities, the right to work has not recognized the right to care. We have generations and generations of lawyers and sociologists that haven't heard of remotely of care. So there's a reconciliation between they seek to have a reconciliation between work and family, but they don't talk about care. And when we talk about who the rights holders are, or the entitlement to care, you know, when we talk about people who have at least have middle school, have studied middle school, you know, we have the ideal worker without family responsibilities. You know, we know that in reality, today, women are still responsible for care. So the concept of contingency is still closely linked to, you know, we know that when there is a contingency, there's going to be risk. And the institutional systems of Social Security call care responsibilities, they call them as family burdens. So when we talk about daycare, we talk about kindergartens, you know, the value of the concepts, what happens is that these are very primitive systems that still regard women as the main bearers of these responsibilities. So coming back to what is happening in Peru and the social and the global South, we need to analyze what's happened with the social policy institutions. They are linked to this contributory system. There's a logic of insurance where the state has a significant level of responsibility, but these institutions are linked to workers and they have contributory systems. We live in a region that for more than 50 years has had informality, you know, that reaches almost the 50%. Could you please speak a little bit? This construction is anachronic. Why? Because precisely this basis, this foundation is intention. So with regard to your question, I think this reflection has to be linked to the tax systems. You know, it has to do what we're going to see in the second part of my presentation, interdependence of rights. Part of what we have done in this 21st century in this continent has to do with the 1990s, the reforms in the 1990s. This feminist has made significant contributions, but the transformation hasn't been that strong. There have been changes in social policies, but we still have systems of fees for male workers, formal male workers that haven't been transformed, that haven't changed. So I agree with you, Lourdes, when we talk about of the compensatory measures, because that's the way they were defined. This idea of compensatory measures to incorporate care responsibilities in the pension schemes, you know, we think they are important because this recognition was important. They were important to achieve the recognition of how care responsibilities affect women. However, we haven't been able to make progress in this regard because the matrix of scheme of contributory and non-contributory schemes have not been fully consolidated because they have to do with cash transfer programs and because we have relatively tolerable poverty levels, and this is crucial because it's easier to sustain some levels of unemployment than some levels of poverty. So we have had relatively controllable poverty levels, and that's why constitutional reforms have not been intensely promoted. So I celebrate what Lourdes was saying. We cannot make progress if we don't discuss labor rights and social protection. The ILO has made some decisions. Let's use social protection and social security as synonyms. I disagree with this decision because social protection is selective and requires an implicit agreement. It's a pact based on solidarity, and pensions are organized according to that logic. If there is greater development or lesser development, the truth is that active workers support passive workers in the hope that when we grow older, there will be more active workers to support us. It's an intergenerational agreement among workers on equal footing. So when we to become rights holders, what does this mean? And that's important to see where women are in social protection. The only women who can access social security are formal wage workers. Care workers, meaning housewives, domestic workers, do not have access to social security. So if they want to be holders of the right to care, they need to be formal wage workers. So, for example, in the past, you had to be married in order to have access to health. And so in our region, we have made great progress to recognize human rights, and we have made progress in same-sex marriage. In Argentina, we have made progress in gender identity, but a care worker in the household does not have access to social security. So if we cannot think of the right to care as independent of other rights, and as Eileen was saying, there's a need for designing interdependent systems, undoubtedly also that undoubtedly have an intersectional perspective as well, because we cannot think of the right to care as a parallel scheme. You know, in the region, we talk about conventions. We have an Inter-American Convention or an Inter-American Convention. We don't need an Inter-American Convention on care. We have many conventions already. We need to see how to effectivize those conventions. And so, and that's what made it so. Recognizing care as a right will not guarantee the benefits. So although we have many public policies in the 21st century that have decreased poverty, and this especially since 2015, they have been very important. However, they haven't been efficient enough to decrease gender violence. Why do we have the kind of gender violence rates in the region? Because structural inequalities continue to affect women mostly. So with regard to what Eileen was saying about having other proposals or the links to other proposals like having this citizen income or basic income. In Argentina, a group of colleagues had proposed a universal citizen income, but but feminists resisted significantly. And so because the feminist resistance said, now you're going to pay, that continues to be the case. So all the energy was directed to show that far from remunerating care work, the point was to redistribute income. This proposal has been around for more than 30 years, and it's like thinking of having a distributive agreement in terms of income. Each person can have a minimum income to satisfy their basic needs. And this proposal goes hand in hand with a tax reform. So this citizen income will be distributed and they will decide, okay, if they will be surfing the net and do nothing, or will they go and work? So feminists resisted this idea because what we wanted to have was a minimum floor of income to help everyone. And I think this kind of debates are important because we have a feminist movement that is very strong and based on theories. And it's important to see how the processes have developed the way they have. And with regard to what you were saying, Eileen, we have many proposals. The issue here is that in this region, we have achieved many changes, but now we need to coordinate the changes. And I see, Patricia, that in Uruguay, the design of the care system in Uruguay, it was designed as a system, not as an aggregate of policies. It was designed as a system. And that goes hand in hand with the logic of the interdependence of rights. How when we talk about the different actors of care within the framework of labor law, in general, in our region, then the business sector has obligations that especially in terms of the reconciliation of work and family. But what happens in all the region, with the exception of only a few countries, the maternity leave, which is the most extended the benefit, the maternity leave is not paid by the employer. This maternity leave is paid by Social Security. And this has happened for 50 years. But employers, even today, argue that they don't hire women because maternity is expensive. And many of you have heard of the literature that in the case of Mexico, the cost of maternity leaves doesn't increase cost that much, maybe perhaps 2% only. So this is very interesting because there's very little monitoring of our states. There's not a labor police, so to speak, and to see if the state operates as it should. We need to talk about the decommercialization of activities, of the actions of the state. So when we talk about worker and capital, So the point is we need to consider, we have to stop considering work as merchandise. So the conditions of domestic workers, otherwise, you know, we have the conditions, the domestic workers in the region are strongly discriminated and marginalized. Domestic work is conducted in very poor conditions. And if I compare domestic work and the conditions in which other formal work is conducted, the difference is abysmal. But despite the protection norms and standards, the levels of registry in the region doesn't reach 30%. The women, there are women who employ domestic, who engage other women in domestic work. And so to talk about paid work and responsibility with regard to co-responsibility, we have voluntary work and we have other, this time of voluntary work. What we are promoting in the region are times and we can see that in many countries changes have been happening very, very gradually, because in the case of the pandemic, you know, there were many delays. Well, I'm going to stop here because we need to start with the second block of Laura. We're not going to have questions and comments for the second round. So all your questions or comments are welcome. Please, very welcome. But write them in the chat. We will systematize your questions and comments for the second block, for the second presentation, and then we will share them in with the group. Please, Laura.
Thank you. Yes, of course. I will answer the questions. Let's take a look at the next slide. Now we're going to take a look about your questions regarding the right to care, meaning and scope. Part of the activism that we had in the region and was, and Aline talked about this, it happened in a sphere that is little known and it is on little recognized, which is the regional conference on women in Latin America and the Caribbean. And this is a form of political debate, and it's the only body, regional body that meets every 3 years with representation for the representation of women in the institutional sphere, women's organizations, feminist organizations, and specialized UN bodies. There are actors from the social, from the civil society. This conference is the political agenda that is decided by the ministers of women ministers in Quito. There were 2 points that were important: the economy of care and the participation, political participation. And this was I had the chance to make do a survey applying the rights-based methodology. This methodology that started this century, based the concept of feminist, which is extraordinary feminist, the approach of touching other fields, that if we use in the analysis and practice in the asymmetrical structures of patriarchal power and the considerations that what sex is supposed to do, what the structure is in terms of economy and development and political participation. This this approach, cross-cutting approach, is very important. This is important that comes from the feminist theory of these days, but with the new millennium and with these new agendas, these two agendas that install the millennium agenda with the 2015 agenda, and the second one, the 2015-2020 agenda with the goals, development goals. What the objective 5 is kept, but there's another one called number 10 that regarding inequalities. This consensus agenda in the region is established based on from the High Commissioner of Human Rights. That is, and what's the idea about this? That they took this feminist approach and say it's necessary that those commitments that have been established in international human treaties in these 70 years of development, that there's a system of human rights. We need to think of it as a starting point, the best agreement we have had, but it's not. It's used for the diagnosis that told us that there was a divorce between the rights, these treaties, and the implementation of policies. If not, we wouldn't have arrived at this unequal situation. They worked with human rights to establish a bridge, but basically a review of the obligations that they are established in these human rights treaties to apply them to public policies. I think this is a methodology, and we applied it to review what was happening with care that were considered in international treaties. It had been included. Eileen in our last meeting did a wonderful job with a very important theoretical contribution, and the Ever Foundation has done it too. And when we review all these treaties, human rights treaties, we see that care has been incorporated. It's just that it's not defined as such. It's there because there's a dignified life, and if we talk about dignified life, we talk about care. The point is that within the standard, we need to interpret it, and that's where feminists has worked on this construction of the stereotypes and biases. Now, coming back to care, when we review, and in my case, when I review in 2007 for a work that we presented with ECLAC at the conference in Quito, we saw that in all the instruments, care was recognized. That what we could build was the definition of provide care, to receive care, and to self-care. When we talk about the right, we need to differentiate it from the concept of need. And why do we need to do that? Because because what established but as the state is a set of standards that tell us what to do and what not to do. Throughout history, since the French Revolution, and according to certain categorizations, each century had saw the development of rights. The French Revolution was the civil rights. Many years ago, women were recognized as right holders of these rights. Still, we don't have full autonomy. The same way that the political rights in the 19th century, first for women, then the suffragettes, and that right was recognized, and the rights and the economics, social and cultural rights, are the rights about recognizing the paid work rights. I'll go to the second one, that this of rights that we recognize the ability of women to paid work and to recognize them as such. And in this, originally, women were protected in terms of motherhood, for example. Well, in many cases, Argentina has not lifted the prohibition of the night shift for women. But when we talk about human rights, there's a central conference was the conference in Vienna that provided an enormous contribution to the feminist movement, where when it is considered whatever violation of human rights produced in the private sphere in the household is a violation of human rights, and the convention that allows the development of looking at gender violence. But in the platforms of action, it establishes the interdependence of, by recognizing that all human rights are universal, indivisible, and interdependent. And that takes us to the obligations of the states. And I'm going to emphasize this point. It's not enough to guarantee rights, political and civil rights, but also to recognize economic, social, and cultural rights. So when we talk about the development of the development of human rights, we have an interpretative development. We call it the corpus of human rights, which it's going to set standards. This interpretive corpus are made up by all the committees that carried out the acts, the making, the CEDO committee, and the general observations that it was the same as the Belém de Pará. But if we analyze the interpretation of the committees, the committee, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, there's a great paradigm change to consider of children that before became rights holders. That was an extraordinary change in paradigms that we haven't changed. We haven't done this in our countries to guarantee the rights of children and adolescents. In all these international agreements, as the interpretative framework, the independent experts in the United States, expert on the right to food, to educational, Inter-American Commission, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, they established some interpretive standards of the standard. They have this minimum points, the basic points to guarantee the effective incorporation of the standard of human rights into political policies and rulings. It refers to all public institutionality. When you take a look at the development of each of the human rights, and we look at it from the care point of view, up until 2015, there was no instrument that would call it the right to care, but there was protection of motherhood, the protection of children, the obligations of parents to children. First, there are concepts that are very important. Universality, that has to do with what we saw in the first block, to overcome this debate regarding about the right holders that is conditioned to being a wage earner, because the standard of universality it's a central point in human rights. All the persons are subjects, are rights holders, are human rights holders, and they're indestructible, indivisible. So the standard of universality, if we take it to the public policy, it establishes, set the bar. It helps us to set the bar. Then I thought that that in the 1990s onward, we had a development in terms of public and social policies regarding focalized programs. These focalized programs have uh, been there for a long time in the region. It's difficult to reform it, but they should establish this principle of universality. If for some reason a sector has been selected, like persons with disabilities, it should cover all the persons with disabilities. Now, this is also associated with the minimum content of rights, where the bodies of interpretations of the committee of the in the committee on the economic, social, and cultural rights says that a state can argue the the lack of compliance with a minimum right. The states cannot do that, even in cases of natural disasters. Then another point is the progressiveness and non-regressiveness. It means that regards the minimum content of rights to guarantee, there's not only to guarantee certain benefits for children at school, it also has to reach this, has to be to reach a full satisfaction, the use of the maximum available of resources by the state. That a maximum available implies compliance, and not only societal improvements, like decreasing the unemployment rate, but that unemployment rate to be evaluated as as an obligation of progressiveness. This improvement in the unemployment rate, it's important to also, it would be also important to we need to, if the unemployment rate goes down, but the gap between employment between men and women, there is no progressiveness compliance. To this obligation of progressiveness, there's a standard of non-regressiveness. That means that no matter what, a state can roll back benefits, go against of the rights acquired by citizens. This is a standard that many sometimes is not complied with. And this has to do with just disability systems, because being rights holders is having the possibility that if there is a non-compliance case or a rights violation or dissatisfaction in the way the state is guaranteeing rights, I could go to a competent right, which is the judicial branch, to make a claim. And then there will be a ruling, etc. To that principle of non-regressiveness and progressiveness, we have the equality and non-discrimination. It's a principle that you can establish differences based on gender, political ideology, or religion, but equality and non-discrimination, the use of resources, for example, within the state, in the regions that do not receive the same number of resources as others. Access to justice in a broad sense has to do with the possibility about to resort to competent authorities to complain about obligations that the state are not compliance with. The access to public information is very important in the field of care, that we have to potentiate very much, because the state is obliged to produce information, but that information has to be public. There's no indication that sometimes in our states they increase indications, but there are very few reasons that will various things that have to do with geopolitical reasons, but in general, a state, there's no reason for a state not to disseminate information. And finally, the point that they were talking about regarding the participation of citizen empowerment and participation that comes from the feminist field. Marta Lamas, for example, talk about this. They talk about more than generating empowerment. Let's talk about women's emancipation in the exercise of their rights, but in an independent way regarding the right to care. This will be achieved when these responsibilities of care and this work are not a, 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 an, an assignment exclusive to women. Perfect. We have 10 minutes. Regarding care and rights, we need that care, the big progress made in this recognition. And we talk about the consensus of Quito, what to think about, not about care not only for children, for adolescents. That's why it's so important to look at recognitions as an exercise of rights by persons, and that's where self-care is included. This is a central point. We are at a moment in the region of enormous tensions and stress of where the the welfare bureaucracies, the budget of welfare bureaucracies are still thinking the old way. Um, and we need to think about elasticity. We make it a virtuous point. This is the essential point that has generated the crisis of care that the pandemic on the highlighted. When you think about the person, we can think about when we think about actors in care that have been excluded from the field of care, and this is important. The debates that have happening by collectives of persons with disabilities, where disabilities say this motto that is established in the human rights, and this nothing without us. What they claim, demand is to exercise autonomy in the exercise to care, not only for self-care, but and systems of care, but also to provide care. And this is a very interesting field where the recognition of care as a right is placed in the person. In the person, this link with all the activities, work, emotionalities that work generate throughout life. When we see all the conventions that make it very quickly, we see how the right to care is incorporated in all these conventions and treaties. Well, we see that uh, where and it was not defined as a right, as care. Uh, there was an author that talked about care, contributed to that there was very difficult to politicize the care, especially in this second decade of this century, regarding the Inter-American Convention on the Protection of Human Rights of Older Persons, from the Quito Convention, and all consensus and designs we'll have in Buenos Aires, the regional conference, where we will have an agenda. In the agenda, we'll have the introduction of a society of care. Then we also have the recognition of care in terms of Article 12 of the Convention, but also the constitutions of this century, Ecuador and Bolivia, 2008 and 2009, recognized it as work, as paid work. And the first one that made a great change as in terms of care was the Constitution of Mexico City of 2017. And and in Mexico, we're talking about this at the federal level, but also the Constitutional Court of Ecuador recognized care and established as an interpretation of the subsidiary role of the state as in the recognition of care as a right. So in terms of interdependence, and this is related to what we talked about in the other block, that this involves all the other rights. The argument is, why do we need the right to care when it's more important the right to food, the right to health? The debate, the debates, these debates were updated a lot during the pandemic. We talk when we talk about economy, not health. Let people talk work, but we don't have that. There are not hierarchies among rights. What in terms of in interpreted terms, the rulings of the Inter-American Court that a right is more important, is not more important than other. All rights should act interdependently, and we have all these rights. And finally, and this was new this year, and we hope that this becomes a reality. I think in September of this year, uh, the because this article becomes part of the Constitution of Chile, with feminist regulations in terms of their constituents, and includes in the Article 10 the recognition of the right to care. All persons have right to care, to receive care, and to self-care from the moment of birth to death. And it also says state the means of a system of care. And then and to finalize it, and continue debate, and if not, we will continue in next meetings. This recognition of the carers' right, if we think about the 2007 from consensus of Quito onwards, it generated this transformative agenda. This we have we can evaluate this agenda. We can look at it positively or say, well, this is very slow. What's important is taking time, taking into consideration the times that we've been through. The pandemic really pushed to the foreground the needs of care, which is a non-monetized, how the non-monetized economy supported the monetized economy. So we have, so now regarding the question that you have, what changes with care as right? Well, because well, first of all, it's recognized as a care. We have the Inter-American Convention. We have to make more efforts so that the Inter-American Convention of the protection of older adults is ratified, but mainly because it operates as a full-fledged universal right applicable to all. We don't need to demonstrate that we have children that nobody's going to take care of. We don't need to demonstrate a situation of vulnerability to be entitled to the right. In terms of civil, the interdependence of human rights and obligations derived from CPRs and ECAR, the obligations and immediate effect. And one of the things that you were talking about, there's an exigibility component because it transcends regulatory frameworks. It's our citizen participation. It's an extraordinary opportunity for men to become providers. They haven't been active in care responsibilities, so they start to give care. This takes us to this interpellation on the public spheres, talking about the standard, the obligations of the states, and we took this power that we have to establish our demands for the state. So this transformation has to be based on standards, gender standards. So it's important the feminist lens when we do this, because so far the experience, save some exceptions, Peru, and the construction of the ministries of women, but is essentially the systems of care came from the systems of social development. That's why it's important, the feminist outlook, that we have transformative policies taking into consideration human rights. And finally, it is a public good that it will imply to break away from this concept as asymmetrical relationship that we have, that the state will want to compensate with through social security systems, but it's a responsibility that the state has to guarantee to people that are right holders. So the field of exigibility is transformed. So it's necessary to universalize the necessary responsibilities, work, and resources, and generate a framework of a culture of care. And these transformative policies are fundamental for this change. So to conclude, this recognition of the care as a recognition of care as a care, it's a regional achievement, and we need to be active as right holders. And the last point is the one that I will leave that for reflection. And if we can start the right not to care and talk about redistributive policies, since women, we have taken care of care, and be able to have the decision to not care, and to promote a redistribution. And this obligation is placed to those who haven't complied with this obligation so far. But it's very important that we work with the compliance with the right to care.
Thank you very much, Laura. Yes, time is always pressing, but indeed we have several more sessions to continue with this reflection. Now, today we have Asako Hattori, the officer of, she works with the Office of the High Commissioner of the United Nations on Human Rights, and we would like to listen to her regarding the challenge it entails to deal with care as a human right. I think Asako will speak in English in case you want to listen to her, listen to the interpreter. Please go ahead, Asako.
Thank you very much. I'm Asako Hattori, and I'm working at UN Human Rights Office, or otherwise known as OHCHR. And thank you very much for the invitation to this discussion. And me and other colleagues in OHCHR, we are very much excited to start participating in this discussion. From my side, perhaps there are lots of things that which already resonate with the presentation, but we wanted to flag first that how we should understand the concept of care, which was already elaborated, and we agree with the multidimensional framework of care as presented as to provide, to receive, and to self-care. But we wanted to also flag that big paradigm shift made by Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disability. That convention actually shifted the perception of right to care or around care, not only from the perspective of caregivers, but also the perspective of rights holders as their own right to receive and seek self-care, to self-care and to receive care. And then that changed the terminology, and Convention on the Rights of the Persons with Disability use support instead of only care, to recognize the autonomy of persons who receive care or to be supported. So just tabling one question that whether we continue talking about care or we can talk about care and support. And actually, as all of us are aware, women, including girls and older women and women and girls with disabilities, we often perform as caregivers. So it's very important to have a right as caregivers, continue enjoying all human rights as caregivers, but also oftentimes women are the one who are entitled to seek care and support. So probably those two dimensions will be very important. And again, to the concept of the right to care, we at least, sorry, I might be still need further enlightenment, but to me, the right to care need to be a little bit more unpacked. Are we talking about the right to provide care? And then if that's the case, are we talking about the labor rights of caregivers? And then if we are indeed, we are talking about right to provide care for others, is there any conflict between the right of caregivers to provide care and the right to autonomy of those being cared for? And then I think at the end of the presentation, Laura also mentioned that are we going to discuss about the right to reject providing care and then how the care responsibilities should be redistributed. And maybe we need another question of, is there a right to reject receiving care and to procure self-care instead? So there could be a discussion of caregivers or the individuals who are perceived as primary caregivers have a right to say no to providing care, and then also the receivers of care to be able to choose what type of care we can access to. And then very quickly that I think the intervention from the previous discussion highlighted that what are the state obligations, what are the role of private sector and community support systems, and then also probably what the role of the family in the obligations to protect and promote right to care. That could be further elaborated. Yeah, and then in relation to the role of family, it could be quite a sensitive discussion because the family could be the foundation providing care, for example, for caring family environment for children, or older persons might prefer to live in the family instead of going to institutions. But at the same time, family could be at a place for human rights violation can occur, both against people who are cared, and then also against the care providers. So those are the quick reflections from our side. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Asako. Creo que muy pertinente.
Thank you, Asako. I guess your observations were very pertinent. And I guess what is clear is that the right to care is very complex. There are multiple dimensions that need considering. So Raquel has raised her hand, and Laura, do you have any quick reflection or comment to what Asako said so that we can, and remember we're recording the session, and so these questions mentioned by Asako could be included so that we can develop them in other sessions. Go ahead, Raquel. Well, first of all, thank you very much for this inspiring session. I am very grateful to Eileen, Laura, and Asako, and I think it's very important to deepen these discussions. And although I've been working on these issues every single day, I think the session was very inspiring. I have some reflections I'd like to share with you, and also a final question. From your intervention, I have something. To me, it's clear that care has been incorporated and is being incorporated into several frameworks. And this is something also for Eileen, but it is still important to incorporate it into other frameworks. For example, national frameworks. You know, standards have been improved, systems are becoming increasingly sophisticated, but we need to think and continue to insist that care is incorporated into regulatory frameworks, national and international. So we need to continue working on implementation. In terms of implementation, I have two ideas. The right to care needs to continue to be unpacked, as Asako said. I think the right to care, the right to receive care has to be accompanied with the notion that care has to be freely chosen. The right to receive care has to be accompanied by the possibility of choosing what kind of care we want to receive. And in the right to provide care, we need to emphasize that the exercise to provide care cannot be, that the right to care cannot be exercised but at the expense of the exercise of other rights. So I think from your interventions, I have these complementary ideas that we need to continue to unpack the right to care and give it meaning. And my specific question is, therefore, the agenda in terms of continue to consolidate the right to care, should the agenda continue working on what is already there, or should it incorporate new elements? And based on what Asako said, I think care requires an immense amount of time. And I think we cannot exercise the right to provide and receive care without guarantees. Yes, the state has to guarantee the provision and reception of care, but there have to be other actors because it is incredibly time consuming, and therefore we need co-responsibility, and co-responsibility has to be at the core, at the center, because of course we talk about the persons that need care. Yes, we need to break away from the dichotomy of the people who give and receive care. We need to talk about autonomy, and every person has the right to exercise self-care. And for example, to guarantee this right, we need to broaden and of course place co-responsibility at the center, and also the reorganization of the right to care. And Laura, please, a final word. Of course, you will be with us in the next sessions, but two questions, two comments, and summarizing what the comments on the chat regarding to what Asako was saying. Yes, of course, we're reviewing all conceptual frameworks, and yes, the recognition of care as a right is not intended to encourage women to provide better care. I think this is important because, as Raquel was saying, because there's social co-responsibility. There are many men that say, I want to provide care, but people don't allow me to. So I think this is central. I think, at least in my opinion, we need to be very careful with the concept of social co-responsibility, because we need to have very clear who the rights holders are. Yes, there's violence in the family there, but also the family provides care. So with regard to what we mean by care, it is important to understand that the care systems that have been implemented in the region recognize the responsibility, care as a responsibility, and the state has been incorporating care as a right. So we need an infrastructure, and the human rights approach has provided standards, progressiveness, non-regressiveness, etc. And in the case of the pandemic, what we saw and the contribution, and it was very important, the contribution of the United Nations system, that we need, regarding care as a right, does not mean that we have a better distribution of care. So that's why it's important to recognize that care is a human right. And that's why the pandemic was helpful in that regard. When we talk about migrants that provide care, for example, we had the argument provided, the kind of care that was provided during the pandemic, will help us to produce a transformation of public policies. Yes, but we will continue in future sessions. Remember that our next session will take place on Tuesday, July the 5th, if I'm not mistaken. And just like with the previous session, we will send you a note where we will include the comments, Asako's comments, Laura's and Eileen's interventions. And we've been trying to decide, 2 hours is not a very long time, but we don't want to keep you to make these sessions longer than 2 hours. So perhaps we will send you some questions via email to lead to further reflection. And therefore, we want to emphasize that we have representatives of the government, the private sector, different collectives, etc. So this theme is very interesting, and it deserves to have different opinions. So it's 11 o'clock in Mexico City. We hope you have an excellent month, and we'll see you in 4 weeks. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Irma, tú guardas el chat, ¿no? ¿Se guarda contigo?
Sí, todo se guarda.
Yo también hice una copia por si las dudas.
Ay, gracias, Fer, y gracias por subir el documento. Fue el único, ¿verdad? El que compartió Verónica.
Sí, es que los demás son artículos. Yo creo que hay que hacer un Word con links porque los demás no se pueden descargar, son artículos.
Ok.
Pero el que mando creo que es el más importante que acabo de publicar, PSI, ya está en el Drive.
Buenísimo.
Sí. ¿Ya paramos de grabar?
Sí, ya paramos.
Sí, ya está, yo ya paré.